A young girl ventures out alone on Halloween night, her path lit only by a glow stick and her fading courage. But as the dark woods close in, she discovers that not all monsters hide behind costumes, and some are hungry for more than just candy. As the crescent moon hovered high above, nearly a third of the way across the night sky, Halloween's hustle and bustle was fading into quiet stillness. On Maplewood Avenue, porch lights flicked off one by one as families packed away their decorations, and trick-or-treaters made their way home. What had been a lively, glowing street full of laughter and excitement was now cloaked in shadows and an eerie silence. The only sound breaking the stillness was the rhythmic slap of small footsteps echoing through the darkness, a little princess making her solitary journey home. Clad snugly in a baby blue princess dress, she walked with purpose down the empty street. A sheer, ice-blue cape trailed behind her, swirling and dancing with the fallen leaves she stirred up. Though the night was calm, the biting chill of a winter breeze was unmistakable. It rustled the bare branches overhead, tugged at the edges of her cape, and toyed with the wild tangle of coppery curls atop her head. The cold bit at her skin, raising goosebumps on her exposed arms. By the time the clock struck 9, the street was a patchwork of dark shadows and faint glows. Dim jack-o'-lanterns grinned weakly at her from porches, while decorative skeletons and ghouls loomed silently in the yards. But despite the spooky scenery, the girl kept a spring in her step, her bright blue plastic slip-on shoes clapping loudly against the pavement. With each bounce of her movement, a white glow stick hanging from a black cord around her neck smacked lightly against her chest. She kept her focus on the houses she passed, only occasionally stealing a glance until one particular home caught her attention. It was different from the rest of the neighborhood's plain, single-story ranch houses. This one had a dark charcoal gray exterior with a vibrant yellow door that practically glowed in the moonlight. Though the curtains were drawn tightly shut, a warm light spilled out around their edges, inviting her in. Recognizing it immediately, she quickened her pace. This was home. As she approached the house, her footsteps crunched along the stone pathway flanked by Halloween decor. Tiny tombstones dotted the yard, and 4 expertly carved pumpkins sat proudly on the steps, including one featuring Elsa's golden face, smiling brightly as if to greet her. Reaching the door, she paused for a moment, casting a quick glance at her reflection in the glass. Twisting slightly, she checked herself over, even giving her backside a quick once-over. Satisfied with what she saw, she adjusted her shoulders with a playful little shake and pressed the glowing doorbell. From inside, the peaceful silence shattered as the sound of a baby crying filled the air. Heavy footsteps followed, pounding toward the front door. Livy could feel someone's gaze on her from the other side before a muffled voice called out, "Livy." Metal chains rattled as they were undone, and a moment later, the yellow door swung open. Cool, bright light spilled out into the dark night, momentarily blinding Livy as she stepped inside. The sharp contrast between the warm glow of the house and the chilly darkness outside left her vision speckled with black dots. "How was it?" a familiar voice asked warmly. Livy felt a hand ruffle her tangled copper curls as the door clicked shut behind her. The woman gave her head a playful wiggle before patting it affectionately and letting go. Livy murmured, distracted as her dark eyes scanned the entryway. A small modern chandelier hung from the ceiling, its orb-shaped bulbs casting soft light across the space. Square archways framed the adjoining rooms on either side of her. "Good," she finally answered, though her scrunched-up nose told a different story. A strange mix of smells assaulted her senses, freshly painted walls from the room on the right and the sour tang of spilled milk wafting from the left. Together, the scents formed an unpleasant cocktail that lingered in her throat. "That's great!" the woman exclaimed, her enthusiasm perhaps a touch overdone. Dressed head to toe in a skin-tight pleather catsuit, with a pair of black ears perched on her short blonde hair, Sonia looked like she had enjoyed the Halloween fun just as much as the kids. "See? I told your dad you'd be fine," she said, crouching down until their eyes were level. Her pale hazel eyes sparkled as she grinned, her claw-like hands resting on her knees. "Did you score a lot of candy?" Livy's gaze drifted to Sonia's bold red lipstick, perfectly framing a set of gleaming white teeth. For a moment, she stared in silence before replying with a nonchalant, "Yeah." She brought her pillowcase forward as proof, nearly bumping into Sonia in the process. Sonia's gaze fell to the pillowcase of candy that Livy thrust toward her. "Wow, Liv! That's a ton of treats," she exclaimed, a wide grin spreading across her face. The Frozen-themed pillowcase, which had been pulled from the back of a linen closet for the occasion, was nearly half full. "I think you might have topped last year's haul," she chuckled, her voice warm and playful. But then her expression softened as her eyes drifted back to Livy's face. "Are you sure you had a good time tonight?" "I did," Livy replied with a bright smile, her copper curls bobbing as she nodded. For a moment, the two exchanged a quiet look, their smiles mirroring each other. Sonia reached out and cupped Livy's round cheek in her hand, her thumb gently stroking just below the little girl's dark eyes. "I'm glad," Sonia murmured softly before standing upright. "I'm sorry your dad couldn't be here," she sighed, reaching into the pillowcase and pulling out a Reese's cup. As she rolled the candy between her fingers, feeling for air pockets, she repeated the same excuse Livy had already heard on the phone earlier. "He said he really wanted to meet you, but he got stuck in traffic. He's proud of you, though." Peeling the wrapper off the chocolate, Sonia took a bite. As her hazel eyes dropped to Livy's shoes, she suddenly froze. Her body tensed before she crouched down, wrapping a hand gently around the little girl's calf to inspect her right foot. The plastic shoe bore small, dark red spots on its top. "Did you get hurt?" Sonia asked, her brows knitting together in concern as she looked up at Livy. Livy quickly shook her head, her curls bouncing wildly. Before she could finish her explanation, a piercing cry rang out from the left side of the house. Livy winced, covering her ears as the noise cut through the air. The sharp, desperate sound of a baby's wail filled the space, immediately pulling Sonia's attention. "Sorry, Livy," Sonia called as she hurried toward the noise, disappearing through the left archway. "I'll check your candy in the living room," she promised over her shoulder. Left alone, Livy stood in the entryway, her gaze fixed on the archway Sonia had gone through. From her angle, she could see the edge of a stainless steel fridge, dark wood cabinets, and gleaming marble floors, but Sonia and the source of the crying were just out of sight. The baby's shrill cries echoed clearly, accompanied by Sonia's soothing yet desperate voice. "Charlie, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Turning away from the kitchen, Livy made her way into the living room. The cozy space was dominated by a black leather sectional, large enough to seem out of place in the modest room. A plush, taupe-colored rug stretched across the floor in front of the couch, and Livy couldn't resist running her fingers through its soft faux fur. Stepping carefully around open paint cans scattered along the floor, she plopped down onto the rug, dropping her pillowcase beside her. She stretched her legs straight out, letting them slide under the minimalist glass coffee table in the center of the room. The table's surface was cluttered with baby toys, snack containers, and a small Elsa figurine that looked just the right size to fit in her hand. As she sat waiting for Sonia to return, Livy stared into the dark reflection of the television screen mounted on the far wall. Her feet idly tapped together, the plastic shoes making soft clacking sounds that echoed faintly in the quiet room. Her gaze wandered to the walls, lined with painter's tape and freshly coated in pale sage green. The blank surfaces felt barren, completely devoid of photos, artwork, or shelves. Eventually, the rhythmic tapping of her shoes began to annoy her, so Livy slipped them off and tucked her legs beneath her, sitting cross-legged on the soft rug. She reached for her bag of candy, but as she leaned to grab it, a faint cough escaped her lips. The sound startled her, and she instinctively covered her mouth with her small hand. When she pulled it away, a single drop of dark red blood sat in the center of her palm. Livy frowned at the sight, her wide brown eyes darting toward the archway Sonia had disappeared through. Seeing no sign of her, Livy wiped the blood discreetly into the plush carpet. "I'm sorry, Liv," Sonia called out from the kitchen, her voice strained and tired. "Just give me a few more minutes to settle Charlie, and I'll be right there to check your candy." Livy mumbled in acknowledgement, though her focus had shifted entirely. She brought 2 fingers up to her mouth, pushing them past her lips and into her throat. As she probed deeper, her dark eyes widened slightly, and a determined look settled on her face. Charlie's cries still rang out from the kitchen, growing more frantic as Sonia's desperate attempts to soothe him continued. But Livy was absorbed in her own task. Her fingers slid further down her throat, tracing along its walls and leaving a trail of thick mucus in their wake. "Charlie, please." Sonia's voice cracked under the weight of frustration and exhaustion. Livy hardly noticed. Her fingers finally found their target, and with a triumphant gleam in her eye, she pulled them back out. Thick strands of saliva clung to her hand, stretching like webbing as her fingers emerged. Pinched delicately between her thumb and forefinger was a tiny baby tooth, slick with blood and saliva. She held it up, her expression unreadable as she stared at the little molar, her unblinking brown eyes dark and unnerving. Lost in thought, she didn't seem to notice the sticky mess trailing down her hand or the eerie quiet that had begun to settle over the house. Livy clutched the glow stick tightly against her chest, her small hands trembling as she walked. This Halloween had been different, and not in a good way. Sonia couldn't take her out like she had in previous years, too busy tending to the endlessly crying Charlie. Liv hated Charlie. He screamed constantly, yanked at her curls, and stole every bit of attention from their father and Sonia. Tonight was no exception. The evening had started with promise, Liv dressed as Elsa, Sonia as Catwoman, and Charlie as a tiny Batman. But everything fell apart when Charlie's cries became unstoppable. Sonia had frantically tried to calm him, but nothing worked. Livy had to plead to go trick-or-treating alone, promising to stay safe and come back soon. Sonia reluctantly agreed, assuring her that her dad would meet her later. He never showed up. Now, as the night wore on and the streets emptied, Livy found herself on Pine Avenue, dragging her feet with exhaustion. The festive excitement had long since faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and growing unease. To her right, the dark woods loomed, their tall trees swaying eerily in the faint breeze. To her left, shadowed houses kept their porch lights off, signaling that trick-or-treating was over. The glow stick around her neck bobbed with each step, its dim light providing little comfort. She hummed softly to herself, a song from Frozen, though her off-key melody sounded frail in the heavy silence. Her eyes darted to the woods, half expecting to see something staring back at her, though she prayed nothing would. She quickened her pace, the humming growing faster and more uneven. Then, the feeling hit her, that prickling sensation that something wasn't right. Her heart hammered in her chest as she tried to ignore it, but her instincts wouldn't let her. She began to run, her plastic shoes slapping against the pavement. Her candy bag slipped from her grip and thudded to the ground, forgotten in her rising panic. And that's when she saw it. A shadow moved through the trees, keeping pace with her. Her wide eyes flicked toward it, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. But before she could scream, something slammed into her side, knocking her down hard onto the cold pavement. The impact stole the air from her lungs. Her head bounced painfully off the ground, and for a moment, everything went blurry. Pain shot through her ribs as she tried to breathe, each gasp feeling like fire. A weak sound escaped her lips, followed by a bubble of blood that trickled down her cheek. Her vision cleared just enough to see the red pool spreading beneath her face, matting her copper curls to her pale skin. She struggled to think, her thoughts tangled like cobwebs in her mind. What had just happened? Then, a hand appeared in front of her, pink and clawed. The nails were jagged, stained yellow, and caked with dirt. Liv's eyes followed the hand as it lowered, revealing the creature it belonged to. It lowered itself to the ground, bringing its face inches from hers. Its skin was an unnatural shade of fleshy pink, shiny and raw, like the skin of a fresh burn. Where its eyes should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin. It grinned widely, revealing teeth that were yellowed and rotting, like something pulled from a grave. "Hi," it said, its voice disturbingly human. Liv wanted to scream, to close her eyes, to do anything, but her body wouldn't respond. The creature tilted its head, its slits for nostrils flaring as it sniffed her. "Ah, don't cry," it cooed, its clawed hand brushing against her cheek in a mockery of tenderness. Liv hadn't even realized she was crying until the cold, sticky sensation of its touch registered. "This won't take long. I promise." Panic flared in Liv, but she remained paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The creature grabbed her hand and lifted it toward its mouth. Its grin widened as it opened its maw and bit down. The pain was sharp and searing, cutting through her days like a knife. A weak, choking sound gurgled from her throat as it crunched through her fingers, chewing them with grotesque enthusiasm. Blood and saliva mixed, dripping down onto the pavement. As Liv watched in horror, the creature's hand began to change. The mottled pink flesh shifted, morphing into a mirror image of her own skin. Within moments, she was staring at her own small, bloodied hand attached to the monster.